It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a temporary dislocation. It wasn't even a speculative frenzy. It was the sound of the monetary foundation cracking. Silver is not just a metal. It is a mechanism, it is a historical constant. It is the only asset that has consistently front-run the death of a currency for 2,000 years. The pattern is unmistakable. The arithmetic is merciless. When the sovereign debt becomes unpayable, when the currency is debased to cover the deficit, the silver price does not just rise, it disconnects. It leaves the orbit of industrial supply and demand, it enters the orbit of monetary panic. We are seeing the early tremors of this disconnect right now. The price action you see on the screen is not trading, it is a warning. History offers us a map drawn in the ruins of empires that thought they were eternal. They all believed their currency was invincible. They all believed they could print their way to prosperity. They were all wrong, the timeline is rigid, the outcome is fixed. The only question is the speed of the collapse. To understand where we are going, we must look at where we have been. We must look at the Roman denarius. We must look at the Spanish piece of 8. We must look at the Weimar mark. And then, we must look at the dollar. The thesis is simple, yet the implications are profound. Silver acts as the ultimate arbiter of a currency's health, functioning as a monetary barometer that registers the pressure of debasement long before the general public realizes the storm has arrived. This is not a theory born of modern economic anxiety. It is a recurring historical phenomenon that has played out with devastating precision across millennia. The mechanism is always the same. A dominant power reaches the limits of its expansion. It accumulates obligations, military, social, and administrative, that its productive economy can no longer support. Faced with the choice between austerity, which is politically impossible, and default, which is geopolitically suicidal, the state chooses the third option. It chooses the hidden default. It chooses inflation. It chooses to dilute the currency to pay its bills. And in every single instance, without exception, silver has sniffed out this fraud before the ink was dry on the new notes or the copper had cooled in the mint. We will examine 3 specific historical case studies that prove this pattern is not a coincidence, but a structural inevitability. We will look at the collapse of the Roman banking system in the 3rd century. We will analyze the price revolution of the Spanish Empire. We will dissect the death of the German mark in 1923. In each case, we will see the same sequence of events: peak dominance, unsustainable costs, a monetary shortcut, and a resulting flight into hard assets that shattered the middle class. The data is clear, the precedent is set. Let us begin with the first case study, the Roman Empire. The Roman economy was built on the silver denarius. For centuries, this coin was the standard of value across the known world, trusted from the misty hills of Britannia to the sands of Syria. In the time of Augustus, the denarius was a pure silver coin, roughly 95 to 98% fine, weighing about 3.9 grams. It was honest money. A soldier knew that his pay represented a fixed amount of precious metal, transferable anywhere in the empire for goods and services. A baker in Pompeii knew that the coin he received for a loaf of bread held intrinsic value that no emperor could erase by decree. But the seeds of destruction were sown in the very success of the empire. As Rome expanded, the costs of maintaining its legions, its bureaucracy, and its public works grew exponentially. By the time of Nero in 64 AD, the fiscal pressure was mounting. The Great Fire of Rome had devastated the capital, and the costs of rebuilding were astronomical. Nero faced a mathematical impossibility. He needed more money than the treasury possessed. He could have raised taxes, but that risked rebellion. He could have cut spending, but that risked the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. So he chose the path of least resistance. He chose the path of the cheat. Nero reduced the silver content of the denarius to roughly 90%. To the untrained eye, the coin looked the same, it felt the same, but the arithmetic had changed. He had effectively created money out of thin air, stealing 10% of the purchasing power from every saver in the empire to fund his projects. This was the first step on a road to ruin that would take 2 centuries to fully traverse, but the direction was set. The incentive structure was now aligned against stability. Future emperors, seeing that Nero had survived the debasement, used the same trick to fund their own wars and lavish lifestyles. Under Marcus Aurelius, the silver content dropped to 75%. Under Septimius Severus, it fell to 50%. The state was now running a continuous deficit, covering the gap by melting down good coins and reminting them with more base metal copper, bronze, and lead. They were literally diluting the wealth of the citizenry to pay for the survival of the state. By the mid-3rd century, the situation had spiraled into a full-blown crisis. The Emperor Gallienus, desperate to pay his troops amid civil war and barbarian invasions, reduced the silver content to a laughable 5%. The denarius was no longer a silver coin. It was a bronze slug washed in a thin layer of silver that would rub off after a few exchanges. The population was not blind. They saw the copper shining through the face of the emperor. They knew the money was bad. And this is where the behavior of the public shifted dramatically. Gresham's law took hold with ferocious speed. Bad money drove out good. Citizens hoarded the older, high-purity denarii, burying them in clay pots in their gardens or hiding them under floorboards. These coins effectively vanished from circulation, leaving only the debased, worthless currency to facilitate trade. Prices exploded. Wheat, which had cost 7 or 8 drachmae in the 2nd century, skyrocketed to 120,000 drachmae by the time of Diocletian. The inflation was not a linear rise. It was a vertical ascent. The state attempted to fix prices with the edict on maximum prices in 301 AD, threatening death to anyone who sold goods above the mandated rate. It failed miserably. Merchants simply refused to sell. Goods disappeared from the markets. The economy reverted to barter. Think of the Roman soldier stationed on the Rhine frontier during this collapse. His salary was nominally increased, perhaps doubled or tripled, but the coins he received were worthless. He could not buy boots for his feet or food for his family. The social contract was broken. The legions, once the pillar of Roman order, turned into bands of marauders, sacking their own cities to extract real wealth: gold, silver, land, slaves, because the state's currency had become a lie. The middle class, the decurions who managed the cities, were wiped out. Their savings, held in denarii, evaporated. They were left with nothing but the worthless tokens of a failed state. The empire didn't just fall militarily. It rotted from the inside out because the medium of exchange had been destroyed. Just like the Roman debasement, the Spanish Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries faced a crisis of currency, but from a different angle. The Spanish case study offers a fascinating counterpoint because it was not a lack of silver that caused the problem, but an overwhelming abundance of it, mismanaged by a state addicted to debt. Following the conquest of the Americas, Spain gained control of the richest silver mines the world had ever seen, most notably the mountain of Potosi in present-day Bolivia. From 1503 to 1660, it is estimated that Spain imported over 16,000 tons of silver and 185 tons of gold. This was wealth beyond the wildest dreams of any European monarch. It should have made Spain the undisputed master of the world for a millennium. Instead, it destroyed them. The mechanism of failure was the price revolution. The Spanish crown, led by rulers like Philip II, treated this influx of silver not as a capital reserve to build industry, but as a credit card to fund endless religious wars across Europe. They spent the silver before it even arrived in Seville. They borrowed heavily from German and Genoese bankers, using the future shipments of the treasure fleets as collateral. When the silver arrived, it flowed straight through Spain and into the hands of foreign creditors and merchants to pay for manufactured goods that Spain no longer produced. Because the supply of money, silver, and gold coinage increased dramatically, while the production of goods in Spain remained stagnant or declined, the result was massive inflation. The cost of living in Spain quintupled. A Spanish peasant found that, even though there was more silver in the kingdom than ever before, he could afford less bread, less cloth, and less fuel. The influx of metal bid up the price of everything. The aristocracy and the church, who held land and collected rents, were insulated or even benefited. But the wages of the laborer did not keep pace with the rising cost of survival. The Spanish crown defaulted on its debt not once, but 4 times during the reign of Philip II alone in 1557, 1575, 1596, and later in 1607. Imagine the scale of that failure. The owner of the world's global reserve currency and the world's largest silver mines went bankrupt repeatedly. Why? Because they did not understand that money is not wealth. Production is wealth. Money is just the claim check. By flooding the system with claim checks while neglecting the factory, they devalued the very silver they were digging out of the ground. The result was a hollowed-out economy. The industrious middle class was crushed by taxes and inflation, while the elite engaged in speculative consumption. Spain ended the century with a ruined economy, a demoralized population, and a currency that was losing purchasing power every single year. The silver of Potosi did not save them. It accelerated their demise because it allowed them to ignore structural problems until it was too late. Just like the Spanish Empire, the Weimar Republic provides the ultimate lesson in the speed at which a modern industrial currency can go to zero. The tragedy of Weimar Germany is often simplified into pictures of children playing with stacks of cash, but the mechanics of the collapse reveal a terrifying sequence of choices that mirror our own time. In 1914, before World War I, the German Goldmark was one of the strongest currencies in the world, backed by gold and trusted internationally. The exchange rate was roughly 4.2 marks to $1. By November 1923, the rate was 4.2 trillion marks to the dollar. This was not an act of nature. It was a deliberate policy choice made by the state to manage unpayable debts. Germany emerged from the war with crushing reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, compounded by massive domestic war debt. The government, fragile and fearful of revolution, refused to impose the austerity required to pay these debts honestly. Instead, the Reichsbank, led by Rudolf Havenstein, began to monetize the debt. They printed money to buy government bonds, keeping the government funded and the workers paid. At first, the effects were euphoric. The inflationary boom kept unemployment low. Factories were humming, the stock market soared in nominal terms. Foreigners flocked to Berlin to buy cheap assets. But the poison was accumulating in the system. The silver coins, the actual hard money, disappeared from circulation almost immediately. People knew instinctively that the paper mark was a lie. They hoarded the silver 1/2 mark and 1 mark coins, melting them down or trading them on the black market. By 1922, the psychological dam broke. The flight from currency began. No one wanted to hold marks for even an hour. A worker would get paid at lunch and run to the nearest shop to buy anything, a piano, a sack of flour, a pair of shoes, anything that was tangible. The velocity of money went to infinity. It didn't matter how fast the printing presses ran. They couldn't keep up with the speed at which people spent the money. Prices doubled every few days. A cup of coffee ordered at 5,000 marks might cost 8,000 marks by the time you finished drinking it. The middle class, the pension holders, the war widows who had saved all their lives in government bonds, were wiped out completely. A lifetime of savings could not buy a newspaper. Conversely, those who held debt or hard assets became the new masters. Industrialists like Hugo Stins borrowed heavily in marks to buy mines, factories, and forests, then paid back the loans with worthless paper dust. The wealth transfer was total. It was a liquidation of the prudent to the benefit of the speculator and the state. The silver price in marks during this period did not just rise. It went vertical, preserving the purchasing power of anyone lucky enough to hold it. A single silver coin could feed a family for weeks, while a wheelbarrow of paper money could not buy a loaf of bread. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is the sound money era. The nation has a currency backed by hard assets or strict fiscal discipline. Deficits are rare, trade is balanced. The economy grows through production and savings. This is Rome under Augustus. This is the U.S. before 1971. Stage 2 is the overextension. The nation becomes a superpower. It engages in foreign adventures, expansive welfare programs, or massive infrastructure projects. Spending begins to outpace revenue. The government raises taxes, but it's not enough. they cannot raise taxes further without causing a revolt. They cannot default without losing credibility. Nero debases the coin. Nixon closes the gold window. The printing press is unlocked. Stage 4 is the inflationary boom. This is the sugar high. The new money floods the system. Asset prices rise, stocks hit all-time highs, real estate booms. The government claims to have solved the problem of scarcity. Economists declare a new paradigm, but underneath, the currency is rotting. Stage 5 is the rising cost of living. The extra currency starts to chase real goods prices for essentials, food, energy, housing begin to creep up. The government blames supply chains, greedy corporations, or foreign bad actors. They manipulate the CPI data to hide the true extent of the damage. Stage 6 is the flight to safety. They realize the debasement is permanent. The stock market might still be rising, but in real terms, it is crashing against gold and silver. Stage 7 is the crack-up boom. Faith in the currency collapses. The masses realize the game is rigged. Panic buying sets in. The currency loses its function as a store of value and becomes a hot potato. The system resets, usually through a new currency, a revaluation of gold, or a total totalitarian takeover. Just like the Romans, the Spanish, and the Weimar Germans, we are currently walking through this exact sequence. Current data suggest we are firmly in the transition between Stage 5 and Stage 6. The interest payments alone now exceed the defense budget. The structural deficit is entrenched. The choice has already been made. The government will not default explicitly. They will inflate the debt away. We see the signs of Stage 5 everywhere. The cost of living has surged. Housing affordability is at historic lows. Food prices have permanently reset higher. The official inflation numbers have come down, but the price level has not. And now we are seeing the early signals of Stage 6. The quiet accumulation of hard assets by the central banks and the informed investors. Central banks are buying gold at a record pace, the fastest rate since 1967. Why? Because they know the dollar's dominance is waning. Silver is currently in a structural deficit. For the last 3 years, the world has consumed more silver than it has produced. This is the merciless arithmetic we spoke of. The COMEX, the primary exchange for silver futures, trades hundreds of times more paper silver than exists in its registered vaults. This leverage works fine during Stage 4. It works fine when confidence is high, but as we enter Stage 6, the physical market begins to break away from the paper market. We are seeing premiums on physical coins decouple from the spot price. We are seeing inventories on the Shanghai Gold Exchange and the COMEX drain to critical levels. The industrial users, the solar panel manufacturers. The tech giants cannot print silver. They need the metal when they come to the market and find the vaults empty. The price will not just drift higher. It will gap up. It will re-rate to a level that balances the monetary demand with the industrial scarcity. Some economic historians note that the dollar is different because it is the global reserve currency. Backed by the U.S. military and the petrodollar system, they argue that there is no alternative, and therefore the U.S. can print indefinitely. However, the incentive structure suggests this buffer is temporary. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions has accelerated the BRICS nations' move away from the dollar. They are actively building a parallel settlement system, likely backed by a basket of commodities including gold and oil. As demand for dollars decreases globally, those dollars will return home, exacerbating domestic inflation. The privilege of the reserve currency is not a permanent law of physics. It is a temporary historical anomaly that is reverting to the mean. The endgames are clear, and they follow a fixed order. First, we will see controlled decline. This is the current phase. The Federal Reserve will attempt to manage inflation at a rate higher than interest rates' financial repression. They will try to burn off the real value of the debt slowly, perhaps 4 to 6% a year, hoping the public doesn't panic. This is the boiling the frog strategy if they lose control. We enter chaotic collapse. This occurs if a bond market auction fails or if a geopolitical shock causes a sudden dump of U.S. treasuries. Yields spike, the economy seizes up, and the Fed is forced to print trillions overnight to monetize the entire debt stack. This is the Weimar moment in this scenario. Silver and gold become the only liquid assets that preserve purchasing power finally. There is the reset and restructure. This is the inevitable conclusion. The government will introduce a new system. It may be a central bank digital currency CBDC tied to a revalued price of gold to restore confidence. It may be a new dollar with a swap ratio of 10 to 1 in 1933. Roosevelt confiscated gold and revalued it from $2,067 to $3,500 in 1971. Nixon ended the gold standard entirely. These resets happen. They are the release valve for the pressure built up by decades of mismanagement. The only variable is timing and pain. Those who understand this pattern do not look at the daily fluctuations of the silver price with anxiety. They look at it with the calm of someone who knows the tide is coming in. They are not speculating on a trade. They are positioning themselves outside the blast radius of the collapsing currency. Subscribe to the channel.